John Fiepel here for GenAI Insights, bringing you the GenAI news briefing, right? The news top news, essential, important, or optional, putting time in your day and thoughts in your mind. Okay, Ankash, start us off with the first one, please.
Yes, John, coming right up. Okay, the first one that we have for today comes from Databricks, and Databricks have launched a new apps platform where you can build tailored enterprise AI apps in 5 minutes.
Yeah, here we go. 5 minutes. If you know a little bit of Python, and also you can stay within the Databricks environment, so you're not leaking out data. So, what do we think here, Tim?
I think it's interesting. This is playing catch up to a certain extent. So there's nothing particularly new here, but Databricks is a big player. And so they're vertically integrating, as we've talked about. And looks like lots of neat features. I would rate it optional unless you're a dyed-in-the-wool Databricks customer dying for this stuff. But it's a product announcement and looks like, as I said, a lot of good things that Databricks is doing. But the 5 minutes is a projection if you're a programmer, and the no code, low code stuff is exploding out there. So we'll see over time how this stacks up against the rest. But really, this is a little bit of catch up compared to what a lot of other vendors already have out there.
All right, so we're going for an optional on this one. What'd you think, Luda, Paul?
I was on the border of important. This is a little bit outside of Databricks because they're really into data. But what it allows an enterprise user to do is stay no other to be integrated into the platform. And so for that reason, it has the security, you can do it on the edge. It's essentially you play with your data. Many people already have ML applications, machine learning applications, and this streamlines it very much. So for Databricks users, this is important, essential to know. But for the rest, I think also important. That's where I was. I'm okay with optional because it's a announcement, it's a catch up, but it brings that interesting feature.
Interesting. So on the border for Luda, Paul, Barney, or Brilliance?
No, it's definitely optional. I mean, I think it's interesting that we've got more and more companies integrating vertically. So here we've got, think of Databricks as data management now, thinking of a little bit of applications. It is interesting. One of the things, I had a briefing with the CEO and management team of a mid-market company yesterday, a couple hundred million in revenue. Entire management team, they're pragmatically thinking about how to use it. And their CIO and management team, as you know, this is moving way too fast for us. We can't keep up. We're going to rely on our existing vendors to bring us AI solutions that make sense in our stack. And, a lot of Databricks users out there. But right now, there's no customer announcements. It's optional and definitely catch up.
All righty, we're going for optional here. Ankash next.
I just want to acknowledge Kevin had a comment here, John.
Oh, yeah. Logical next move to help companies differentiate themselves with app development. Yep. I agree with him. I think I agree with you, Kevin, this race to vertically integrate has a lot to do with trying to assert market power, build a moat. And, it's a real free-for-all out there. It reminds me back when, there was competition among the big mainframe providers, Burroughs, Univac, CDC, IBM, and they all get squished out. And so it'll be interesting to see what happens here. Tim, as you point out, practice versus theory. Okay, Ankash, next.
Okay, the next one is around a startup called Encompass, and it is providing reliable LLM API with no rate limits. I believe this is important for on-premise and private deployments.
All right. What do you think, Luda? You agree with Ankash? He's coming in on important for
well, it is a startup and it's a product announcement. The importance of it is for leaders to know that this is out there. And I don't know whether this is the first one or there's competition, there will be competition, but it is essentially allows a much faster and cheaper deployment inference, right? So they're saying about 30% fewer GPUs compared to NVIDIA deployments, and 2x fewer GPUs when compared to LLM, cloud LLM. So it's a good innovation, and it's probably worth putting important on it. I agree with Ankash.
Okay, we're headed for important here. Paul, the skeptic on product announcements here.
Yeah,
In the trenches of, vaporware and other techniques.
yeah, it's someone who saw a little vaporware in my life. I think I think this whole movement to sell solutions to enterprises like they want to buy, and enterprises do not want to buy solutions that have variable cost in them. So per seat pricing, ways to fit into my existing budget, I think is an important trend. We're seeing this a lot in this total cost of ownership deep research we're doing here. But this is a startup, and it's still pretty early, and I don't think anything particularly novel the pricing here. So optional in my mind.
All right.
Yeah, I agree. Optional for me. I mean, yes, it's interesting, but they didn't even do a simple comparison of, for X number of tokens, is this really cheaper than OpenAI or Microsoft Azure or Gemini? So you'd have to go do that math yourself. And to Paul's point, and we've all seen this, I certainly have, having purchased lots of software over the decades, they love to change the pricing model to obfuscate pricing. And this is still a variable pricing model at the end of the day. It's not a fixed model. So yes, there's quote unquote no rate limit, but that's just what they're talking about there, is that OpenAI and others will throttle back and slow you down, right? So you experience latency because they simply can't support the number of people they need at the price points they're offering. So to me, this is just an obfuscation so they can look like they're selling cheaper when it's not at all clear that they are selling cheaper. Classic vendor ploy. So we'll see how it goes. And also, to me, the most interesting thing here is I do believe, I didn't have time to go back and check, I do believe it's cheaper. It's looking cheaper, which goes to my, I still think it's a hypothesis. I'm not declaring it a fact or it will happen, but what's the old Warren Buffett joke? How do you become a millionaire? Start with $1 billion and buy an airline. And so we'll see if that similar process applies here, where people just start giving away more and more compute for less and less money, and the profit pools don't turn out to be for the vendors, but for the consumers.
Yeah, so this will certainly put a pressure on the cost again. So, but you are absolutely right. This is, who knows what actually the real cost is here. One feature is right, but they can change it too. Agree.
All righty, we're headed for optional. Sorry, Anka, you've been outvoted. All right,
no worries. Yeah. So the next one comes from Azim Azhar and BCG. It talks about generative AI's impact on computing power.
Yeah, I was going to come down on important on this one, but just barely. It's a lovely discussion of the relationship of compute demand and compute supply, and they did some detailed analysis of things like advertising. So, when you have customized advertising, for example, if it's video, it's orders of magnitude more than text, and the river of cache that goes through advertising for non-sequential messaging is massive, right? Hundreds of billions of dollars. Henderson Institute does a pretty good job. BCG's, it's BCG's version of the McKinsey AI thing, and Azim is a fellow HBS fellow that Paul and I are. So I gave this an important, still not a required reading, but really would give, I think, gives an AI leader a good perspective on where future demand and supply might be, and certainly will be something that we'll be using as we put together our total cost of ownership models.
Yeah, I won't argue with it, but because I think it is a good read to broaden your perspective, and they do a good job with their framework. I think the caveat has to be pay no attention to the man behind the curtain, because this is a classic. There are just assumptions here that if you move them a tiny bit, you get complexity, you get enormously different outcomes. And there are assumptions that they can predict the future, and we all know how that goes. So I'm reminded of the bandwidth predictions in late 90s, early 2000s about how fast broadband was going to be available to everybody. And it was orders of magnitude slower than most of the predictions, even the conservative ones, because it turns out to be really hard to lay fiber and get it to the last mile. And it just took forever, and people won't pay that much, and telcos don't want to do that much. So we'll see if this is different, but there are just some really difficult digestive processes that have to go through to build up this much capacity, assuming that the other huge assumptions are that their demand functions are right, because we don't know how this stuff is going to get used. We have no idea. If you said 3 years ago that NVIDIA would be one of the most powerful and profitable and largest market cap companies in the world, people would have laughed in your face. How can that much demand for GPUs be generated in 3 years? And here we are. So I think those kind of discontinuous breaks in assumptions also make me very skeptical about the outcomes. But the thinking process is good. And the outline is good. So I think it's a good read. So I won't argue with important. You just have to have that huge caveat that says pay no attention to the actual numbers, or at least pay attention to them, but have a huge skeptical eye, because changes in these grand assumptions will make enormous differences.
Yeah, but I think
And John, besides, I think Tim makes a very good point. And it's also, I'm not sure it would make any difference on the strategy of the enterprise leader at the moment. So they will still do what they do, and this is not going to help them, especially because it sits on so many assumptions. I agree with Tim. So I was firmly optional on that, even though it's a great piece. I loved reading it.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's. I think the of course, in any dynamic market, we can sit here and say we can't know. Yeah, but I also think that they are not. The tone of it is not presumptive. They admit that there's massive uncertainty.
Yeah.
So I think that if they're coming out here saying we know the truth, but I think they're saying more what you said, Tim, here's how to think about the problem.
Right. That's what I liked about it. The framework for thinking is good, but you have to keep it. That's what it's useful for. It's a good framework. They did some decent analysis. I agree.
Yeah. They also have good data on, GPUs, CPUs, what the relative drivers of demand are.
Yeah. So I'm okay with important, because important is you don't have to read it, but it's a good read.
Yep. Mm-hmm. All right, Paul, you okay with important?
I am. Yes. It's we got a lot of smart people on the call here. I defer to the team.
All right.
Yeah, we're struggling here, actually.
All right, we're going important.
Clearly some controversy on this one.
Right. Well, the one thing, I just want to highlight Tim's thing on demand side. John, as you know, the total cost of ownership, we're really trying to figure out what's demand range. And we've seen AT&T talk about how they're consuming 1 billion tokens a day. For a company that big, is that 5 billion 2 years from now, or 20 billion, particularly with voice and widespread adoption? So it really is a huge variance in assumptions, as Tim was highlighting.
Yes. And I think the other thing is that we have different pieces of potential change, right? We have algorithm improvement, which could be radical. We've got model architecture.
Right. Exactly. Right.
Model architecture, which has huge implications. Where do I write things? And then
I think it could just as easily get better as worse. It's just hard to say. There's so many possibilities.
Yeah. And then you have the dynamics of a semiconductor market that, has really complex relationships between supply and demand. I mean, sometimes it trades like oil, flips between value and cost. And sometimes it is much stickier than that because of things like CUDA and, the software stack integration. So anyway, all right. So we're going to give this baby an important. Next.
Good. The next one comes from TSMC and NVIDIA. So TSMC is using NVIDIA's QLitho computational lithography platform to improve production at TSMC.
Yeah, I don't know. I continue to be impressed by NVIDIA. But anyway, just amazing, improvement in the creation of value here. Let's see, who do we have on this one? We have
Tim.
Tim. What do you think?
Yep. I gave this a important actually. And the reason is because it's a good use case, in addition to being a really interesting piece of news about an important process and supply chain issue. So I think, yes, it's really interesting, but the most interesting thing is that they didn't really say, but it appears to be a diffusion model to do some of the mask modeling, which, I worked a long time ago in a galaxy far away. I worked on CAD systems, and masking is one of the hardest parts with lithography. And if you think about, it's just hard to even imagine for us, these 3 nanometer, 2 nanometer levels where you're trying to basically paint a picture that you're going to imprint on a piece of silicon that has widths of 2 millimeters and trillions of connections.
2 nanometers. You said millimeters.
2 nanometers, sorry. And that's on the level of molecules, right? So it was just astonishing and really cool. So if you're a tech geek, great article to read. If you're an AI leader, I think it's important to understand supply chain issues, and this could be a big impact. So I think it's important for that reason. But I also think, hey, look at this. This is the folks eating their own dog food, and they improved dramatically their capability by using generative AI techniques, not in the final mass. This is a great example also where you can't make a mistake. It's not 95% isn't good enough when you're routing wires on a chip, right? It has to be 100% accurate. But they got a huge, what I would call superhighway effect by using generative AI in the middle to create part of the model. And then they do a deterministic model as the last step because it has to be right. The wires have to be right. So this is a classic, to me, maybe a primary example now as an exemplar of how these things will get used, where you can really create this super fast, get me close to my destination, and then I'm going to fine tune's the wrong word because it has meaning here, but then I'm going to use a deterministic mechanism to get when I need an absolutely perfect answer.
Yeah, the numbers are amazing. 30 million compute hours to do a mask.
Yeah. Well, it's not surprising if you understand how hard that is to do and the complexity of it. Yeah. That part's not surprising. Improvement is what's astonishing, how much they improved it.
All righty, we're heading for important. What do folks think here?
I wouldn't argue with important because it will have a serious impact when implemented and when it's really out there in the chips. But I mean, day to day, it's just to be aware.
Paul, where are you on this thing?
Important. I continue to see AI leaders not understanding how important NVIDIA is, and they are not a chip company. This is another example around that.
Yeah, that's true.
All right, we're heading for important. Akash, I can back that. Next.
Okay, the next one comes from Langchain, and they have launched long-term memory support in LangGraph.
Yeah, so here we are. Actually giving some memory and personality, well, it didn't say personality, memory, long-term memory to our Langchain inferencing. What do you think here, Luda?
I actually rated this as important. The reason being that people, the way ChatGPT performs, people underestimate that it doesn't really have reasoning. And in order to have reasoning, it has to have a lot of components to get it done. And one of this is memory. And so somebody in one of the panels or one of the presentations said that LLMs are like stochastic parrots, something like that. So they really don't quite understand the environment, don't quite know how to reason, but they appear to be. So this is a building block to translate short-term memory from one query across queries and then create more memory and thus more reasoning across the user's requirements. I think it's an important progress piece, even though it's a product announcement. And Langchain has quite a big following among the developers. So I rate it as important.
All right, we're headed for important here on this one. What do you think, Tim?
Well, I would respectfully call it optional. It's a product announcement. Memory is available in certain other places. They are a big vendor that is one of the, certainly if not the top, what we would call a pipeline vendor, you know, an orchestration vendor, certainly among the top 3 or 5. But it's a product announcement. So I have trouble, unless the product is really dramatically changing the landscape, you know, I have trouble giving it a more than an optional.
It is, though, Tim, if you have built anything with it, you have to code memory. You have to pass it to the pupils now. And there's no real...
You have to code this. Remember, it's a less code, but it's still coding, right?
It is, but it's an important block, I think, to...
Yeah, I wouldn't argue with that. I'm not going to, you know, lie on the railroad tracks for optional. If we think it's important, I can go with important. It's a short article. It's kind of techy. You know, again, from an AI leader perspective, that to me is like, okay, you know, I'm going to have my folks go read this. I'm not going to spend a lot of time with it.
Sure.
I was going for optional myself for those reasons. Paul, where are you?
You know, I think we have a new bar for laying on the tracks for rating. You know, I think it's optional. I don't have as long strong. I'm not going to lay any tracks. It's optional.
Okay. Yeah, I'll bow to the majority.
You know, in Massachusetts, you can lay on tracks pretty much anywhere because so many of them aren't used anymore. Anyway. All right, I'm going optional on this one. Next.
The next one comes from Nomic, and it talks about GPT for all version 3.4. So this is one of the most used sort of models for offline deployments of LLMs.
Okay, Kevin's making the case for on our last one for important. Sorry, Kevin, can't go back. Not going back. No, sorry.
He's found his railroad. That's why.
I know. I feel very much railroaded, but it's okay.
Now, I just I was looking at this thing. I'm just getting to know this company, LLMs for Everyone. This seemed to me like super optional. You know, whatever, lower back pocket on, you know, right cheek or something. Anyway, this seems like, you know, new models that help you track what you're doing in the context of you know, Excel and Word documents and so forth, maybe kind of competing with Copilot, I guess. But this struck me as optional. Folks okay with optional?
Yeah, 100%. I mean, you know, I almost think they should be, the FTC should take a look for false advertising because it's called GPT-4 for all. But it's really an open source product aimed at open source models. I'm not even sure they support GPT-4 at all.
Gotcha.
So, not to make a pun. So it seemed a little misleading if you look at the title. Beyond that, it's not clear what they do or how big they are.
Okay, we're headed for optional. Luda, you okay with that?
Yeah.
All righty. Ankash, next.
The next one comes from Palmera X004, and they are introducing intelligent actions.
Yeah, I know Paul was going to do. We lost Paul here. When do you guys want to take a look? I did not have a chance to look at this one. So
yeah, I can start. Sure. Again, this is pretty interesting. It's a company that does have some traction, but I would still rate it optional. It's an interesting announcement, but it's a product announcement. And again, in the big trend issue that we've been talking about now for some time, really trying to integrate several factors to support what do we call it now? Agentic. We love to make up words, don't we? Agentic workflow. So you can, you can easily integrate RAG, and you can more easily make it do actions, but it's not presto, change-o, push a button. You still have to program, but it's less programming and easier programming to get something that supports a workflow end to end. So that's what they're after. And they're kind of in that market. They're an okay player at some level. They have customers and things, but this is a product announcement at the end of the day.
All righty.
Yeah, so I agree with optional, but
All right.
What I am not very agreeing about intelligent actions. There's nothing intelligent about it. It's just an ability to call and call more accurately.
Right. Call easy. Yeah, it's a workflow.
Yeah, it's a workflow optimization technique. There's no intelligence about it. And in order to be, like, going back to my point about memory and the like, we're getting there. Like, this agentic system would not perform unless they have reasoning abilities, intelligence, memory abilities, and the like, that they yet don't have. But this enables, easier calls. So yeah, optional for me as well.
All right. Optional it is. Langchain will get us to tote board. Just we continue to get positive feedback from our event. Over the next couple of weeks, we're going to be putting out more and more of the content in terms of videos and other things that were going on. Really exciting. It was a lot of fun, and there's also a number of things happening in terms of new events with MIT that we'll talk about, tomorrow, and so forth. So any other announcements, Luda, Tim? Akash?
Not for me.
All righty. So we have a couple importance, mostly optional, and lots going on in the marketplace still, but no huge announcements as of yesterday. Very good. Bye, everybody. We'll see you tomorrow morning. Take care.
Thank you.
Thanks.